Alright, this one was packed. We are talking legendary lore reveals, we're talking big emotional setups, we're talking some of the most hype character confirmations we've had in a while. This chapter had layers, from meaningful power-ups to political intrigue. Let me just get straight into breaking down everything that stood out for me in chapter 1152 because there is a lot to go through. But of course, before we begin, please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to help your fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. With that said and done, let's get unpacking. So the chapter begins where we left off with Luffy, the monster trio, Loki and friends back in the underworld, and it finally gives us the answer that we have been wondering for a very long time. That is how to deal with the Holy Knights, and specifically their pesky abilities in their immortality, or at least their regenerative abilities. Ever since the Holy Knights were revealed to be seemingly unstoppable, very similar to the Gorosei from the previous arc, fans have been long wondering how are the Straw Hats going to face them? How are they going to defeat these mysterious foes? And of course, like many fans have already speculated, Conqueror's Haki is the answer. Gaban heavily implies this in his explanation that one must use King's Haki mindfully, and in doing so actually fulfills another long-held fan speculation, one that's been held ever since we saw Gaban at Elbaf, and that is that Gaban is going to be the one to teach the Straw Hats how to counter the God's Knight's overpowered abilities. And this confirmation of the importance and the role of Conqueror's Haki actually heavily implies that Loki also have Conqueror's Haki as well, seeing as at the mention of this, he is so confident that he can be the one to defeat the Holy Knights. And the fact that he does have Conqueror's Haki, I'm sure isn't a huge shock to anyone. I mean, as a new hype character that was introduced so late into the series, there was no way that Loki wasn't going to have Conqueror's Haki. Of course, I love the scene of Gaban pointing out Zoro's Haki while Sanji's having a mental breakdown over Zoro, who hilariously wasn't even aware that he had Conqueror's Haki. But of course he does. I mean, fans have known for a while now, but it seems that Zoro had just been using it subconsciously all this time. I guess very much like how Luffy was doing so earlier in the series. Many have wondered in the past from how far back did Zoro unlock his Conqueror's Haki. Some even argue that it goes as far back as the pre-time skip era, and that it was only in the post-time skip that the hints about his Conqueror's Haki was only growing stronger. For example, the way that he dealt with Monet back at Punk Hazard, beating her without even making contact. Zoro doesn't even touch her, I mean not really. He swings near her and she just breaks, like mentally crumbles. She's so overwhelmed by his will that her body reacts as if she's been sliced. A textbook case of intimidation as a result of Conqueror's Haki. That Monet moment has always been one of those blink and you'll miss it character defining moments. It was such a clear example that Zoro isn't just strength and swordsmanship, he has presence, command, an aura of dominance, and that's what makes it land. And then there's Sanji. I know it's just played for laughs here, but I am one of those that does actually believe that this little joke may be a setup for Sanji unlocking Conqueror's Haki later on. If you look closely at the panel where Sanji asks Gaban whether he has it, the scene immediately cuts to Loki and Haruden arguing, and then we cut back to a panel of Sanji, but here his eyes are hidden. It's hard to tell, but it seems like he may be reacting to something that Gaban has answered, has told him. Maybe it's an outright confirmation that no, you don't have Conqueror's Haki. Or maybe it was a clue, it was a tip as to how Sanji can unlock his. Either way, after this scene, Sanji doesn't seem too negatively affected, so I'm leaning towards there being some hope for him. Sanji's moment may still be coming. That small panel with Sanji's eyes obscured, that is classic foreshadowing. Although if you ask me personally, I actually think it would be funnier, or honestly more fitting, if Sanji finds his own way of dealing with the Holy Knights, if he unlocks a unique version of Conqueror's Haki. Like maybe it's never outright confirmed that Sanji has Conqueror's Haki. Instead, Sanji awakens something that doesn't seem like traditional Conqueror's Haki, but something that is uniquely his. Maybe powered by emotions, powered by love. We've seen Sanji do the impossible before, like kicking ladies phases, all things that get explained later on. But who's to say that Sanji can't harness his own version of willpower? It could even be a poetic counter to the cold, brutal dominance Conqueror's Haki usually represents, because that really isn't who Sanji is. Sanji doesn't dominate people. Sanji serves them. He protects them. He loves them. That's his whole deal. So honestly, I wouldn't be shocked at all if when the final battle comes, Sanji ends up hurting a Gorosei in some ridiculous, unexpected way. And maybe he says something dumb like, maybe it's the power of love. Something corny, and that line, half joke, half truth, that might end up being his signature moment. But in any case, if we come back to this chapter, my takeaway from this Zoro and Sanji dynamic is that their rivalry is evolving beyond just comic relief. This transition from gags to growth is something that Oda has been threading in for years. We saw this with their pact at Onigashima, and now it's being used for further character growth, mainly for Sanji, since Oda loves giving him those internal realization and identity-based dilemmas. It's also worth noting yet again that Gaban himself is a Sanji parallel in many ways, and so if Rayleigh is Zoro's spiritual predecessor, then Gaban might be Sanji's. And so if Gaban has Conqueror's Haki, which he most certainly does, then Sanji having it isn't a matter of if, but when. Even if Oda decides to express it in a subversive or ambiguous way, like Sanji believing that it's just the power of love. And I know this may be a hot, controversial topic amongst fans, so I will just end it by saying how classic shonen this all feels. Zoro's quiet ignorance and Sanji's loud insecurities are two sides of the same coin. Now moving on, another classic gag, Luffy asks Loki to join his crew. The hilarious part is that, as usual, Luffy never thinks of the consequences. He's all about the vibes. I can't believe that Zoro had to point out Loki's size, whereas of course Sanji's first thought was, how the hell are we going to feed him? That being said, we are in the perfect place to solve both problems should Loki decide to take Luffy up on his offer. The food issue could at least be temporarily resolved by bringing meat and supplies from Elbaf. Loki's size issue is a little trickier, but it is something that the crew could realistically work on. The fact is that they are at Elbaf, the home of the legendary Atom Tree, and that could be key. That tree is known for producing the strongest shipbuilding material in the world, and it is the very same material that was used to construct the Sunny. So it is very well possible that they could expand or reinforce the Sunny so that it could accommodate a giant like Loki. Plus with Biblo and their Iku Iku no Mi, having a devil fruit that could potentially help enlarge or reshape the ship. Look, all I'm saying is that there are options for making it work. What's great is that even though Loki refuses, even despite the fact that this offer means his freedom, it says a lot that Luffy is choosing him. We know Luffy's gut feeling is almost always right, and unless Oda swerves us and gives Luffy his first lesson in being wrong about someone, which would also be kinda perfect seeing as Loki is the god of mischief, I still see this as an absolute win for the crew. In any case, Loki is going to be freed because Gaban has asked Haruden and he is vouching for Loki's innocence. That was revealed magnificently in this chapter. The reveal was even greater than I imagined though, because Oda dropped an even bigger bomb that both Shanks and Gaban were present at Elbaf during the time that King Harold was supposedly killed by Loki. And you may also remember that I have said previously that I do think Shanks knows the truth, that he knows that Loki is innocent, but he's had his own reasons for keeping him locked up. And I have also long said that Gaban may be in on it, but also more importantly that Jarul is also involved in this conspiracy, which very much seems to be the case, seeing as Lord Jarul was with Loki the day that they visited King Harold, the day that King Harold was murdered. So I could just stop here and just revel in my vindication, but we have no time for that because boy oh boy are we in for another potentially huge emotional One Piece flashback. Honestly, this is a family drama turned murder. You already know it's going to hit hard. On top of that, it's a double-layered flashback. First 14 years ago and then all the way back 109 years. When the timeline jumps that far back, you know Oda is cooking something deep. That 109 years ago point is so intriguing because it's just such a huge time jump, we really don't know what to expect. The world is completely different to the world we see now. This is an age before the golden era of pirates. It's an age before all the heroes, all the legends of our recent past. But first of all, I do want to unpack the whole Shanks and Gaban portion of the flashback. This will eventually tie back into the whole King Harold and Loki plotline, most likely towards the end of the flashback. But for now, this exchange between the two was packed with fascinating details. Let's start with the little confusion with the perception of time, shall we? Gaban wonders when was the last time that the two had met or had shared a bath like this, and he guesses that maybe it was like 3-4 years ago, to which Shanks corrects him, pointing out that it has been 10 years, a full decade since Roger died. Now you could dismiss this as Gaban simply misremembering, except for the fact that there is an ongoing theory about time moving differently in Elbaf thanks to Louis Arnaud's warning at the beginning of the arc that one shouldn't stay too long on the island. Ever since coming across that comment, fans have been speculating that time dilates differently in Elbaf, and that when the crew eventually leaves the island, they're gonna find that the outside world has changed drastically in their absence. And this exchange between Gaban and Shanks might just be subtly supporting that theory. Or at the least, what Louis' warning might be referring to, and what we might be seeing here, is that Gaban is just confused about time because giants age slower, or aging just doesn't mean as much for giants, or time in general doesn't mean as much for giants seeing as they live such longer lives. So he's just become accustomed to the giant's way of life, to the giant's passage of time. And that's why 10 years has only felt like 3 or 4 for him. Either way, this is definitely a subtle nod to that time mystery that was posed at the very beginning of the arc, because we know that Oda doesn't just have meaningless throwaway dialogue. But here's another major kicker. This chapter outright confirmed another fan theory that has been circling for a while. Shanks had the Abyss Mark. The same symbol that we see on the Holy Knights, we see is located on his left arm. And it makes sense too, considering that he is a celestial dragon descendant and a member of the very important Figureland family. Now, I guess to be accurate, that mark on Shanks doesn't exactly seem the same as the one on the Holy Knights. I mean, it has fewer details, for example, but this may just suggest that the mark is incomplete. Maybe there are a number of stages to receive the full Abyss Mark, and maybe Shanks changed his mind part way. Maybe he rejected getting the full mark. Either way, this revelation paints a completely new picture of his past, and this reveal may even fix one of the most infamous Shanks plot holes about why he lost his arm to a Sea King that even pre-time skip Luffy could defeat. That moment was always used as slander against Shanks. Some fans even called him a fraud for it. Whether or not this criticism made its way into Oda's ears, we'll probably never know. But now it's safe to speculate that Shanks let the Sea King take his arm on purpose. It was a symbolic rejection of his celestial dragon heritage, a clean break. He gave up his arm to sever ties with his path to the Holy Knights and the world that they represented. Which is wild because that also reframes a core moment within the series. An iconic moment that has become almost synonymous with One Piece itself. It means that Luffy didn't just get inspired by Shanks, he liberated him. Shanks was the first person that Luffy ever saved. And that liberation, cutting away from inherited fate and choosing freedom, has continued as the running theme of Luffy's entire journey. I mean, chills, right? Another major reveal is that Shanks was once believed to be the destined child. Gaban mentions this, and it's heavily implied that the Roger Pirates knew about a golden child, possibly one that's going to turn the world upside down. It's probably something that they learned at Laugh Tale, something that relates to Joy Boy's own history, and it's very possible that that's what Roger whispered to Shanks that made the boy cry. I think that they thought that the promised one was Shanks, but of course now we know that it's Luffy. Or rather, we think it's Luffy. The Child of Destiny prophecy could be about someone who's going to end the final war, reunite the races, bring about some sort of great upheaval, something akin to bringing about the dawn of a new world. It's still ambiguous, but it's fascinating that Shanks was once considered that figure, and now he's acting more like a guide or the guardian of the true, real one. And I have much more thoughts about this whole Shanks lore, so don't fear, I will discuss this in much greater detail another day, but within the context of this chapter, I can't not mention how much my heart panged at hearing or reading Shanks say that he would have liked nothing more than to just being a happy, jolly pirate with Buggy. This is another major tearjerker just waiting on the sidelines, and I don't know if I can handle it. The relationship between Buggy and Shanks is something that Oda has been slowly but surely building up since the beginning of the series, and then more recently, Oda has been laying a whole heap of heart. I was instantly reminded of Buggy's own very heartfelt memory when he was disappointed in Shanks for not choosing to pursue the One Piece immediately upon their captain's death, and this really cast a new light on that mini Buggy flashback. Because we were seeing that interaction from Buggy's perspective back then, Shanks seemed just so carefree. And that breaks my heart because the way that I'm interpreting it, in Buggy's mind, given that Shanks was always the stronger one, the more special one, Buggy probably thought that he just didn't matter as much to Shanks. And so in his memory, in his recollection, he remembers that Shanks was so flippant about the whole deal, about the fact that the two were just going to go their own separate ways. Whereas reading Shanks' dialogue now, you just know that it equally upset Shanks, it equally broke his heart that the two best friends weren't going to continue sailing together forever. But I don't want to cry, so we're going to move on. There was also a little tease about Little Garden during this interaction. Their conversation gets cut off, but it clearly hints at some more lore to come. And honestly, it is about time that we do circle back and delve more into some of the oldest, most overlooked islands from the early Grand Line era. And with Dory and Brogy being major players again, this should link back beautifully. We also get more information about Shanks' time at Marijois. Remember, Shamrock did mention earlier on in the arc that the two brothers have met. Well, now it's also revealed that Shanks also met King Harold back during his time on the Holy Land, and that event seems to be a part of the larger Harold flashback that we have just started embarking on. Speaking of which, I just love the way that Oda introduced the Harold segment. A full mystery build-up with silhouettes teasing us just enough to get our speculative brains rolling. Classic Oda playbook. Again, if you've been following my take on the Loki situation, you already know my theory. Loki didn't murder Harold in cold blood out of ambition or betrayal. If he did it because he had to. I don't want to jump to conclusions just yet because we're only at the beginning of the flashback, but the imagery we get of King Harold being stabbed by his own soldiers is very telling, especially because it also looks like he's in the middle of transforming into something, maybe a monster. My theory? All the Celestial Dragons turned Harold into a test subject for beastification. Given we've seen the Domi Reversi powers being used on Dory and Brogy, I think it could be a similar situation where King Harold was being perhaps reverted to a wilder giant form, something that he has rejected ever since embarking on his peace reformation project. And this was King Harold turning into a monster and a giant beast, one without consciousness, like we've seen with Dory and Broggy. It's very much worth noting that large blast of Conqueror's Haki that seems to be emanating from the castle, which is very similar to what we saw with Imu here again much more recently. So then what could have happened is that back then, back 14 years ago, his soldiers had to stop their king before a possessed Harold went berserk. But because of the sheer strength, the sheer size, the sheer power of King Harold, the royal guard failed, and so Loki was forced to end it himself. The fact that Loki is so hesitant to talk about what happened with Haraldin, I think that speaks volumes as well. He almost seemed to be pleading with Gaban, please don't say anymore. I don't want to relive that day, but also I don't want them to know the truth. And I think that's because Loki doesn't want his father's memory being tarnished. It's clear that he holds a deep, deep love for Elbaf. You can see it in the way that his eagerness to defend his homeland, he says our homeland. We've seen multiple times that he's genuinely hurt that his own brother could see him in that way. And based on this chapter, I do think that Loki would rather be held captive, rather face a long and painful execution, rather than reveal the truth if the truth means tarnishing his father's legacy. One thing's for sure, there is a tragedy just waiting to be fully revealed. And it has all the classic hallmarks of a classic One Piece flashback: loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, and the burden of leadership. Speaking of leadership, it was very interesting to note that Loki was already calling Harold a world government dog in the flashback. This seems to imply that he knew of a deal between Harold and the world government, which of course does track with the comments made by both Imu and the Holy Knights earlier in the arc. But this does truly complicate the whole political intrigue even further. What exactly was the relationship between King Harold and the world government? One thing I can say for sure is that King Harold is going to be one hell of a character. Oda giving him his own flashback within a flashback? What struck me was how much Harold's designs and his behaviors parallels that of Loki's. The way that he stomps that soldier in his flashback within a flashback mirrors that exact same aggression that we saw of Loki in the first flashback. And this is going to show us the true Elbaf, that spirit, that wild warrior nation that we were all expecting before it was revealed that Elbaf has been a renewed peaceful land. This Elbaf of the past isn't going to be gentle, it is raw, fiery, untamed. And what we're about to witness is why and how that wildness got stripped away. How one king's fall, King Harold's fall, led to Elbaf becoming the nation of restraint and peace that we see today. A story about transformation. A king consumed by something dark. A prince forced to make an impossible decision. And a nation that was forever changed. Now those are just some of my thoughts on this brilliantly dense chapter that was chapter 1152. Let me know your thoughts, let me know your questions, your speculations, all of it by leaving a comment below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, and I promise to give you more One Piece discussions, and in return I promise to give you more One Piece content so that we can just continue obsessing about our favorite series together. You can also support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my crazy ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.